Hi, I'm Ava. That fateful evening when everything shifted for me, my mother gripped my arm tightly, pinned me against the doorway of a bustling ballroom, and murmured into my ear, "The city's richest folks are all attending. Tuck yourself away in the remotest spot, and whatever you do, avoid drawing any eyes." Her words hit like a stinging blow, a harsh cue that in her eyes I was less a child and more a blemish to conceal. I came across as a dirty little secret, a flawed element in the flawless facade she tirelessly maintained. Ever felt like a burden within your own household? Like your existence itself was a hassle? Before I dive into what unfolded once the spotlights ignited and Mom's complexion drained of color, drop a comment below about your viewing spot and hit that subscribe button. Believe me, you won't regret sticking around for the moment her jaw dropped as the whole room stood up cheering for me. Our household wasn't always this way. The wealth showed up just a couple of years back, ushering in a transformed version of my mom, Celeste. She grew fixated on prestige, on facades, on squeezing into Miami's elite Coral Gables scene. Overnight, our sprawling multi-million-dollar estate turned into her private theater, with my big sister Brianna starring as the star performer. Brianna had it all, flawless, thriving in her career, driven and gifted at networking in ways I could never match. Me. I was the keyboard player, the idealist, the one holding onto a creative pursuit that Celeste dismissed as pointless and moneyless. Dad, Marcus, stayed mostly out of sight, buried in the job that bankrolled this lavish life, turning into a quiet observer of the deepening emotional divide tearing through our home. This unfairness wasn't a one-off. It permeated my daily existence. The sharpest emblem of my erasure was Grandpa's piano, an aged Steinway Grand, its timbre scarred from years of playing, with certain ivory keys faded to yellow, still bearing the subtle marks of his touch. He'd shown me how to play, how to express myself through notes when speech fell short. For me, that instrument went beyond mere decor. It embodied my legacy, my refuge, the sole space where I could exist freely, free from scrutiny. Yet in our sleek contemporary home, nothing so steeped in the past and lacking in gloss had a place. Celeste banished it to a cramped storeroom upstairs, amid dusty crates and outdated pieces that clashed with her chic new vibe. Each visit to that dim, grimy space felt like encountering my own banished self. In stark opposition, the central lounge served as Brianna's shrine. Perched atop the sleek marble mantel beneath custom spotlights sat her corporate accolades and honors, gleaming crystal figurines and shiny brass engravings touting her as Rising Business Star of the Year or a pioneer in money management. Mom polished them meticulously each morning and seized every chance to showcase them to visitors stepping inside. "Look at my Brie!" she'd beam, swelling with obvious delight. That icy, sparkling array embodied what mattered most to us: concrete wins, financial clout, widespread acclaim. My melodies, by contrast, were elusive, heartfelt, and thus, in her view, utterly worthless. I recall a meal several months prior with some of Dad's professional associates. A gentle elderly guest inquired about my pursuits. As soon as I started sharing my love for the keys, Celeste interrupted with a patronizing chuckle. "Ah, Ava with her tunes," she remarked, like describing a cute quirk. "It's her little kid's pastime. It occupies her time as Brianna constructs a dynasty." Heat flushed from my cheeks. The embarrassment burned so fiercely that a lump swelled in my throat, silencing me through the evening. I glanced at Brianna, who offered a faint, self-satisfied grin, then at Dad, who just averted his eyes to his food, dodging any clash. In that quiet, it hit me. I was utterly isolated. The evening of Dad's firm's charity event marked the peak of those endless slights. The frenzy at the house centered solely on Celeste and Brianna. Their custom outfits, shipped straight from a high-end design district shop, dangled like masterpieces. Stylists and artists buzzed through their suites as I quietly prepared alone, slipping into an outfit from a regular retailer. Decent enough, but it yelled second rate beside theirs. The drive in Dad's sleek black Cadillac Escalade toward the upscale Miami Beach resort hung heavy with unease and quiet. I stared at the passing city glow through the glass, a pressure building in my ribs, sensing deep down that the night promised nothing new. Just more dismissal, more veiled disdain. Stepping into the venue, the vibe hit like a wave, the gran. The ballroom glittered under sparkling crystal chandeliers that cascaded like shimmering jewel cascades, while the atmosphere buzzed with the chatter of Miami's high society. My mother underwent an immediate metamorphosis. Her grin radiated brilliance, her gestures graceful and deliberate. She maneuvered through the throng like a seasoned commander, presenting Brianna to one influential figure after another. It happened right then, just after exchanging pleasantries with a prominent property tycoon, when she drew me apart. Her hold on my arm was tight, bordering on hurtful. She guided me to a quieter spot by the staff doorway, locked her gaze onto mine, and unleashed those words like sharp blades. Her tone held no fury, just an icy, practical ruthlessness. She was safeguarding her place in the social hierarchy, and I represented a threat that demanded containment. I was dutifully directed to my assigned spot, a modest two-seater table tucked in the dimmest, most remote nook of the ballroom, adjacent to a utility drape. From that vantage, I could observe the whole affair clearly, yet remain utterly unseen by the rest. I observed my relatives holding court at the heart of the action. My mother chuckled with infectious energy. Brianna, at her side, inclined her head assuredly, while a financier addressed her with evident respect. My father was deep in a deal-making discussion, clutching a tumbler of bourbon. They projected the ideal portrait of a formidable, cohesive clan. And I orbited as the overlooked moon, circling in a path so remote that my presence merited scarcely a mention in their grand evening. The peals of mirth and the tinkling of crystal glasses drifted to me faintly, like a remote murmur, solidifying the invisible barrier dividing me from their world. To halt the tears tracing paths down my face, I lifted the gala booklet from the table. It was a substantial, refined volume of sleek pages bearing my father's corporate emblem in gilded script. I leafed through it aimlessly, merely to distract my fingers and thoughts from the persistent pang in my heart. I skimmed the sections on addresses, the auction lots, the profiles of the awardees, and finally, in the performance lineup, my attention snagged on a brief italicized announcement tucked near the page's edge. We are sorry to announce that our featured pianist, Mr. Theodore Jones, has withdrawn from his evening recital owing to an unexpected health issue. In the shadows of my secluded spot, a faint flicker kindled within. It wasn't a strategy or a fully formed notion, just an opening, a faint ray piercing the void I'd believed inescapable. My pulse leaped sharply against my chest. That line in the booklet appeared to shine amid the obscurity of my hideaway, serving as both a summons and a verdict. I glanced at the platform, where a majestic ebony Steinway concert grand stood mute beneath a lone spotlight. It was a stunning instrument, gleaming and impeccable, worlds apart from my grandfather's cherished, weathered upright. For a fleeting moment, dread surged through me, sending a shiver along my back. What right did I have to even entertain such a notion? I turned my eyes back to my kin. They thrived in their domain, joking, mingling, wholly unaware of me, or the turmoil churning in my depths. The concept, so vivid in daring moments before, withered beneath the burden of endless self-doubt, fading to a soft murmur of defiance. Right at that instant of hesitation, a waiter neared my table. For a split second, I imagined he sought my drink preference, a brief nod to routine courtesy. But instead, with detached briskness, he informed me, "Miss, would you please shift your seat slightly leftward? The dessert trolley needs to pass." He avoided my gaze entirely. I was merely in the way, an item to adjust for the smooth flow of the occasion. I complied wordlessly, sliding my chair a short distance over the plush rug. The embarrassment was slight, undetectable to outsiders. Yet to me, it felt like the cosmos affirming my mother's decree. My role was peripheral, unobtrusive, never to disrupt or stand out. I shrank further into obscurity, a discarded fixture in the margins of a gathering that wasn't mine. I gripped the booklet as if it were a buoy, scanning the cancellation notice repeatedly. My mother's words reverberated in my mind, dismissing my melodies as immature pastime, a futile diversion. Yet in rebuttal, my grandfather's encouragement resurfaced. "Your sounds aren't meant for their ears, little Elenita," he'd say, his weathered hands steering mine across the white keys. "They're yours alone. They're your essence. Don't allow a soul to mute them." The clash between these dual perspectives on my path was the tension that shaped my very being. One championed my mother's quest for prestige and validation. The other honored my grandfather's inheritance of affection and creativity. In that shadowy recess, I grasped that the night's true stakes lay not in captivating others, but in choosing which voice would claim victory over my spirit. I lifted my head, and my stare met Daniel's, my father's aide. He stood positioned discreetly by one of the ballroom's pillars. He scanned the gathering with his characteristic subtlety. Daniel stood out among the acquaintances in my family's expanding social sphere as someone who had consistently shown me authentic curiosity. On occasions when he'd come to the house on business, he'd slip a glance into the practice space and inquire about the composition I was working on. He recognized my deep enthusiasm, and in contrast to the rest, he had never dismissed it. Our gazes locked, and though he offered no grin, he delivered a subtle, nearly invisible inclination of his head. It conveyed not sympathy, but comprehension. It seemed he could sense the concept battling to emerge in my thoughts, and rather than critiquing it, he bestowed upon it his quiet endorsement. That minor signal served as a stabilizing force amid my ocean of uncertainties. Moments afterward, the event host ascended the platform. Flashing a polished grin, he lightly struck the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, a brief update on tonight's lineup," he declared. "Unfortunately, our gifted performer, Mr. Theodore Jones, won't be able to grace us this evening. Rest assured, though, melody has a way of persisting." A wave of subdued groans rippled through the attendees. My palms grew clammy. The chance was no longer a concealed blank in the schedule. It had become a declared absence, a glaring gap at the evening's core. For an instant, all eyes shifted to the lone keyboard atop the stage, now emblematic of an unfulfilled commitment. To me, though, it resembled a gateway flung ajar. The issue shifted from mere availability to summoning the bravery to step through. My thoughts raced straight to the neglected chamber on the upper level of our Coral Gables residence. There, shrouded beneath a pale cover, sat my grandfather's upright. I recalled the texture of its weathered frame, the faint dissonance in certain keys, the aroma of legacy and recollections that wafted from it. That piano had been my sanctuary, my trusted companion. By comparison, the concert grand on stage was a tool for display, an apparatus of flawless execution meant to captivate. They represented clashing realms, yet the lessons in melody from my grandfather emphasized feeling over flawlessness. It involved conveying a narrative sans speech. I understood that the tool itself was irrelevant. The essence lay in the spirit behind it. I could channel the essence of that overlooked heirloom and let it echo in this chamber of unfamiliar faces. Deep in reflection, I noticed Brianna approaching my spot at the table. She was with a refined lady who hung on her every word. She didn't pause or even glance my way, but as she glided past, her voice carried a soft chuckle. "Oh, absolutely. That's my younger sibling, Ava. She's quite reserved, you see. She likes to stay out of the spotlight." The lady flicked a brief look in my direction, blending intrigue with a hint of superiority, before continuing onward. Reserved rang like a polite term for irrelevant. It lacked my mother's malice, yet it stung deeper. A nonchalant dismissal, a method of scrubbing me from the family portrait in public, reducing me to a mere aside in her dazzling personal saga. The hurt pierced keenly and icily, underscoring that even to my sister, I posed a relational burden. From my vantage by the pillar, I could dissect the subtle hierarchies ruling the room. My mother reigned supreme without challenge. She glided with deliberate poise, her flowing satin dress trailing behind. I observed her chuckling with a community official, grazing the elbow of a financier's spouse, and introducing Brianna to a financier with evident satisfaction. Each motion, each phrase formed a calculated exchange aimed at bolstering her network prestige. My father, Marcus, hovered nearby, yet he played the supporting role rather than the lead. His duty involved funding the display, offering smiles as required, and authorizing the payments that sustain this ongoing production. Within this network, worth derived from connections, sway, and the skill to broadcast unblemished achievement. My abstract devotion and absence of worldly drive rendered me valueless tender. In my mother's ledger, I tallied as a deficit. That's when Daniel appeared beside me with such quietness that he nearly jolted me. He bent as if tweaking an item on the table and breathed into my ear. His tone was a faint whisper beneath the ambient tunes. "The platform's vacant, Ava. The keyboard's prepared. The announcer scrambling for an alternative." He hesitated, then uttered the phrase that transformed it all. "Your grandfather once shared with me, your playing could halt the clock. Maybe these folks could use a pause in time." He issued no command, merely approval. He evoked my true self, not via my mother's lens, but through the viewpoint of the one who initially instilled in me a love for harmony. The unfairness of my circumstances clashed fiercely with my grandfather's inheritance, and I realized inaction was impossible. I drew in a steadying breath, letting it expand my chest and steady the quiver in my fingers. Gradually, I rose. My legs wobbled as though they might buckle. I straightened my gown, a subtle action that seemed like donning a suit of protection. I glanced back once more at the central table. My mom was beaming at somebody. My sibling was scrolling through her device. And my dad was engaged with a colleague from work. They inhabited their separate realm, a sphere beyond my reach. Yet for the initial time, that realization brought not sorrow, but an odd feeling of freedom. Their oversight of me ceased to sting. I was prepared to step into the spotlight under my own conditions. I began to stride forward, gradually emerging from the obscurity of my secluded spot and heading toward the isolated glow illuminating the platform. The chatter in the grand hall didn't hush right away, yet I sensed gazes starting to track my progress. Initially, it came from the closest groups, folks viewing me as an oddity, a lone female proceeding with unexplained resolve. But nearer to the platform, the influence expanded like waves across a pond. Discussions stuttered to a halt, necks craned. The pressure of countless stares bore down on me, blending bewilderment, curiosity, and astonishment. Invisibility was a thing of the past. Each footfall across that luxurious rug represented rebellion against decades of enforced quiet. Fear evaded me. Instead, an unusual serenity prevailed, as though I were approaching my fate. I arrived at the base of the modest stairs ascending to the platform. My pulse thundered like a bass drum, primed for the standout display of my existence. I ascended the initial riser, then the next. Reality contracted to the narrow beam of illumination ahead. The hall's buzz faded to a low drone in my hearing, reminiscent of ocean waves echoing in a conch. The scrutiny of inquisitive looks dissolved. All that remained was the irresistible draw of the instrument. It felt as if I'd been submerged for ages, and with each rising movement, I neared the breakthrough to gasp my inaugural true lungful of oxygen. My once shaking palms now gripped with unexpected steadiness. like they sensed their imminent role in destiny. My strides carried an assurance sourced not from logic, but from profound depths, a primal urge insisting this path was essential for survival. Upon gaining the stage, the event host pivoted in my direction. His polished grin solidified into a facade of bewilderment. He was a 40-something fellow, with meticulously groomed locks and a flawless ensemble, evidently accustomed to dictating every moment of the gathering. His lips parted, likely to intervene or question my bold intrusion. Our stares locked briefly. I'm unsure what reflected in mine to him. Maybe not the unseen offspring of Marcus Rucker, but an individual with zero stakes left. Prior to any syllable escaping him, I nodded faintly and murmured in a tone unfamiliar even to myself, "If you would, only a single piece." The delivery held no supplication, only resolve. It stood as an assertion, beyond mere entreaty. He froze, taken aback by my nerve, and in that pause, I seized the moment. Sidestepping him sans reply, I proceeded directly to the grand piano. Up close, it loomed even grander. The ebony finish gleamed beneath the overhead beams, mirroring a warped, stretched outline of my features. Unlike my grandfather's, it lacked the aroma of legacy. It carried scents of wax and latent promise. I settled onto the cool leather bench. Briefly, dread loomed again. The expansive room sprawled out, an ocean of faceless attendees amid ornate setups. A familiar twinge of doubt resurfaced, my mother's echo in my thoughts claiming I had no place among them. But then my digits brushed the ivories. The touch sparked like a jolt of current, grounding me anew to reality and intent. The piano offered no critique. It simply anticipated. Right then, as my hands acclimated to the board, I lifted my view, and my sightline settled on the head table. There she was. My mother Celeste fixed her gaze upon me. Her dialogue had cut off abruptly. The gracious grin aimed at a key executive had evaporated, supplanted by sheer incredulity. Her typically sharp, strategically lively eyes bulged, locked on me amid horror and frosty rage. No astonishment, no worry surfaced. Only the outrage of one whose meticulously crafted narrative had been torn apart by a bit player bold enough to ad-lib. Her complexion blanched under the lavish cosmetics, her mandible locked so rigidly that a faint twitch rippled along her jawline. Time halted. In her stare lay judgment. Next to her, Brianna's response diverged, yet exposed just as much. Her immediate reaction was mortification. I watched her face redden, her glance flicking hastily to nearby setups, assessing the blow to her reputation. Her posture broadcast unease. She huddled a bit in her chair, as if yearning for the ground to engulf her entirely. She wasn't facing me head-on, her eyes shifting restlessly between my silhouette on stage and the champagne flute in her hand, as though neither sight offered any relief. My dad, Marcus, just seemed utterly adrift. His features, typically etched with corporate worries, now brimmed with sheer bafflement. He stared at me like I was some unfamiliar face, a child he'd never truly met. In his gaze lingered no rage, just profound disorientation that stung deeper than my mom's wrath. Her stare drilled into me like a beam aiming to bore right through, wordlessly demanding I rise from that stool and retreat to my shadowed spot. For the briefest instant, she nearly won. The burden of her disdain pressed on me like an invisible force I'd yielded to all my years. My posture sagged as uncertainty crept back in, undermining my resolve. What on earth was I thinking? Here I was, on the verge of the ultimate rebellion against her wishes, right in view of the very folks whose judgments she held sacred. Yet suddenly, my grandfather's face flashed in my thoughts, vivid as if he sat right there beside me. I recalled his gnarled fingers clasping mine, his gentle tone whispering, "Music speaks without deceit, my little Ilanita. Let it reveal your reality." Reality. That word struck home. My own reality had been muffled far too long. Strength surging anew, I averted my eyes from my kin. I severed the connection with my mother, a gesture that seemed to snap the final tether binding me to her dominance. Fully facing the piano now, I presented my back to the crowd and all their presumptions. In that instant, the grand hall, my relatives, the event, it all vanished. Nothing remained but the instrument and me. The hush enveloping the space had grown thick with suspense, poised on the edge. No longer mere bewilderment, it hummed with eager suspense. I sensed it hanging in the atmosphere, a bottled-up communal thrill eager for unleashing. The host had stepped aside to the stage's flank, watching me with an unreadable look. He'd yielded the floor to me. No interruption would come. The decision rested solely with me. My hands settled onto the keys, registering their even, chilled smoothness under my touch. A fresh slate. Unlike the faded, battered ivories on my grandfather's old upright, these carried no past. I was set to etch one into them. Drawing in a steady breath, I paused briefly, relishing that serene pause right before the tempest. I reflected on the melody he'd shown me, his original creation laced with sorrow, yet pulsing with defiant optimism. Not meant for flashy displays of skill, it stripped the spirit raw. It chronicled a soul discovering grace amid suffering. And soon, it would echo my own tale. It stood as the sole retort to the shame, the one path to reclaiming my expression. My eyelids fluttered shut for a moment. I no longer stood in the opulent Miami Beach Hotel's charity soiree. Instead, I was transported to that cramped, musty chamber in our Coral Gables estate, scented with aged timber and echoes of yesteryears. My grandfather's essence lingered close, his comforting aura wrapping around me like a soft shawl. His inheritance wasn't the wealth or prestige my mother chased. It was this harmony, this sanctuary, this enduring verity pulsing within. And amid the profound quiet of that stranger-packed ballroom, with my pulses sinking to the tune yearning to emerge, I readied myself to disclose my true self to all. I would perform, not for them or my loved ones, but for the hidden child in the shadows and the elder who showed her how to soar. The atmosphere thrummed with pent-up strain. I perceived countless stares boring into my rear, each harboring its own query. Who was this young woman? What bold move would she make? Intrigue had swept away all apathy. From her seat, my mother must have been plotting countless schemes to downplay the fiasco, twisting this uprising into some quirky tale. But deep down, I knew this unfolding event defied diminishment. I was poised to rewrite the tale she'd so meticulously woven. My fingertips lingered above the keys, poised in midair for what stretched into an endless heartbeat. Then, within that hallowed, charged quiet, bearing the full load of my suppressed existence, I struck the opening chord, a crisp, unadulterated, wistful tone that cut the silence and saturated the expanse. That initial tone, a bright and alone, drifted through the heavy ambiance of the hall like an inquiry. It rang out softly, not brashly, but with a poignant clarity that clashed against the realm of shallow chats and contrived chuckles. The low buzz across the room didn't halt in a rush, but ebbed gradually, akin to waves pulling back from the beach. Tables nearest the platform quieted first, followed by those farther out, until an utter watchful calm gripped the whole assembly. I experienced that calm not as burden, but as a void I could at last populate with my authentic sound. The rage on my mother's. Her expression hardened into sheer astonishment. She'd aimed to tuck me away out of sight, yet here I was, quieting the whole gathering with just one chord. My hands glided across the keys with an ease that overrode any anxiety. This wasn't a showy display of skill, no dazzling runs or frantic pace. It was Grandpa's creation, a tune that wove a tale, It opened with a soft melancholy. The sounds conjured the sensation of wandering a vacant home, loneliness resounding in each harmony. It captured the tale of the neglected chamber, the overlooked instrument draped in cloth. Through the sounds, I was voicing all those seasons of fading into obscurity, of getting pushed to the edges. I avoided glancing at the crowd. My focus stayed on my fingers, though I sensed the vibe in the hall altering as idle interest deepened into real focus. I was exposing my innermost self to all, and surprisingly, shame didn't touch me. Initially, the listeners wore puzzled looks. Folks likely anticipated some easy tune to underscore their sweets and chats about work. Yet Grandpa's work insisted on attention. It carried a weight, a raw sincerity that pierced the contrived vibe of the occasion. Utensils halted midway to lips, goblets lingered in midair. Polished grins faded, giving over to thoughtful stares and amazement. The high society crowd from Miami, the very group my mom labored to dazzle with her riches and standing, found themselves drawn in by the so-called kid's pastime of her overlooked child. The twist was thick enough to savor, a sharp, sweet edge blending into the tune. I lifted my gaze briefly, locking eyes once more with the head table. Mom's face had shifted from stun to a chill, restrained rage. She perched rigidly straight, a rigid grin fixed in place, like this fit her scripted show. But her stare revealed another truth. They were icy shards vowing harsh reprisal. Brianna, next to her, had moved past embarrassment to pure shock. Her lips parted faintly, her eyes darting from my spot on stage to her bubbly drink, weighing the fallout from my defiance, and then to my dad. Dad stood out as the sole one whose look truly started to transform. The bewilderment on his features melted away, yielding to an intensity I hadn't witnessed in ages. Complete, unwavering focus aimed right at me. As I progressed through the work, dread vanished entirely. Instead, an odd, potent bond formed with everyone present. They ceased being a faceless group. They became observers. The mighty instrument, once so daunting and foreign, now seemed like part of me. Each tone I struck became a phrase I'd long held back. It declared my presence and worth. It proclaimed my true self. The flow passed through me with a smoothness that caught me off guard. For the first time ever, I stopped seeking approval just to be. Note after note, pause after pause, I staked my claim. In that bold act of owning myself, I uncovered a resilience I never realized I had. The tune shifted. The starting sorrow yielded to a stormier, fiercer passage. The phrases recounted the slight at the hall's doorway, my siblings' offhand scorn, the myriad moments my words got quashed. It started as a mournful outpour, building toward a defiant shout. My hands raced along the keys, not in wrath, but with a freeing force. I channeled every ache into the sounds, reshaping it into beauty and might. I was converting the toxin they'd fed me over time into a cure. The unfiltered sentiment swelled through the space, a surge of emotion that wrapped around all, compelling them to sense my past pains, to grasp it wordlessly. That's when it hit me fully. Dad tilted ahead in his seat, arms on the surface, his frame fully turned to the platform. The facade of the unyielding tycoon, forever fixated on transactions and image, splintered. His gaze, which had always seemed to bypass me, now tracked my fingers intently, mirroring each motion. And under the hall's gentle glow, I spotted something that almost threw off my rhythm. A shimmer of moisture gathering at his eye's edge, not from sorrow, but from realization. Right then, he grasped he'd overlooked something essential, that the girl he believed he understood was merely an outline of the one before him now. He was truly beholding me, perhaps for the very first time. Mom caught Dad's shift. Her glance flicked from me to him in a split second, layering fresh anger, now laced with alarm, onto her face. His emotional stir struck as a breach of her storyline. a fissure in the polished front she'd constructed for the family. Her authority was slipping away right before the crowd she aimed to dominate. She attempted to speak, to edge closer to him, to murmur something that might jolt him from his daze. But she held back. She realized it was pointless. The enchantment of the melody gripped too tightly. Her helplessness hung in the air, radiating from her even across that gap. The fight was turning against her, and the most bitter sting was that I was the one claiming victory. I drove the composition to its peak. The tune ascended, saturating the expansive hall with an irresistible power. This was the section my grandfather dubbed Hope, a rush of tones evoking endurance, splendor that wouldn't fade. I invested every ounce of my remaining energy into those closing bars. All the shame, isolation, and quiet resolve that had simmered within me surged through my fingertips, erupting into a grand, unyielding resonance. It marked my ultimate statement, my emphatic conclusion. Gone was the overlooked figure in the shadows. I embodied the tempest. I was the blaze. I was the harmony itself. And right then, bathed in the glow of the spotlights, I sensed a truer version of myself than ever. The last chord lingered in the atmosphere, echoing with a pure bell-like precision that stretched on forever. My fingers hovered above the keys as the vibration gradually dissolved into nothingness. Then came the quiet, a profound void, yet it wasn't hollow. It brimmed with weight, infused by the raw feelings of the scene that had unfolded. I sensed the unified suspense of the crowd, breath suspended in hundreds of lungs. During that utter hush, spanning just a couple of seconds but seeming endless, I understood my triumph. Applause wasn't necessary. That instant of pure suspension, of mutual acknowledgement, served as my genuine tribute. It confirmed beyond doubt that my expression had at last been acknowledged. Then the initial clap shattered the stillness. It started softly, intentional and echoing, a lone beat. It originated from an elderly gentleman at a prominent table, the renowned builder and benefactor, Mr. Sterling, whom my mother had spent the night wooing with her finest tactics. He rose deliberately, gaze locked on me, and struck his palms together in a solid, reverent strike. This wasn't mere politeness. It was a judgment. In that flash, his action affirmed my creation in ways my family never could. That solitary rhythm sparked the wildfire across the plain. The weight of his endorsement freed the entire gathering to respond freely, without restraint, and the realm my mother had meticulously assembled started to quake at its core. Like ripples chasing the initial surge, the hall's occupants surged upright. The noise swelled rapidly, a thunderous endorsement that struck me with tangible impact. This went beyond courteous nods for an incidental performer. It was fervent, authentic, an ovation on their feet. The clamor permeated the space, rebounding from the glittering fixtures overhead and pulsing through the parquet beneath to envelop me on my perch. It roared approval, a symphony of unfamiliar voices who, in mere moments, grasped my narrative more deeply than my own parent had over 2 decades. I sat still, letting the sonic tide envelop me as it cleansed layers of uncertainty and disgrace, stranding me renewed and quivering on unfamiliar ground. It rang as the purest melody I'd ever encountered. Gradually, emerging from a deep reverie, I pivoted on the bench to confront the throng. My sight swam with the moisture now tracing paths down my face. But these weren't drops of sorrow. They signaled release. I beheld an ocean of joyful expressions, of touched souls, of outsiders regarding me with awe that stole the breath. They formed the upper echelons of Miami society, the influencers my mother wielded as gauges of worth, and everyone stood in my honor, championing what she dismissed as a juvenile pursuit. The twist of fate cut so sharply, so ideally, that a faint chuckle, nearly a gasp, slipped from me. I'd stepped into that venue as a hidden embarrassment, yet now I commanded their focus. The obscure nook I'd been relegated to had transformed into the spotlight, and the radiance was mine. My eyes naturally drifted to my relative's spot, the heart of the upheaval I'd unleashed, and there they were. Celeste appeared ashen and frail, her pallor defying the layers of costly cosmetics. She'd risen along with the others, yet her motion was robotic, an obligatory act to blend in. Her grin locked into a ghastly mask, stare empty as though beholding a specter. The astonishment had erased her anger, stripping her bare and mute. Every bit of her influence, her societal clout, had evaporated with the echo of my finale. She'd been vanquished on her turf, using her strategies amid her public. She observed as the gleaming award Brianna had buffed with such precision paled in comparison to the ancient artifact I'd stowed away in the loft. Brianna, seated next to me, joined in the clapping, yet her gaze revealed the turmoil churning within. Her expression blended shock, envy, and a reluctant admiration she'd never directed my way before. She shifted her focus between me and the tycoon, along with the elite guests surrounding us, and I could sense her calculating thoughts aligning. She was grasping that the influence I'd unveiled moments ago couldn't be purchased, passed down, or networked into existence. It was genuine, a quality she, with her array of corporate accolades and strategic triumphs, could never claim. Right then, her polished glass prizes adorning the shelf in our Coral Gables home dimmed entirely. They stood as lifeless items, whereas my melody pulsed with vitality. Yet it was my father's response that shattered my emotional barriers at last. Marcus wasn't merely on his feet. He led the standing applause with fervor. His cheers rang out the strongest, the most fervent, and tears streamed unchecked along his cheeks. These weren't the sentiments of an executive stirred by a charming tune. They were the outpourings of a parent abruptly confronting a harsh reality, one he'd overlooked for years. His stare, locked onto mine, brimmed with a fierce sense of accomplishment that stung, mingled with profound, tangible remorse. From afar, despite the gap between us, his mouth shaped two unspoken phrases I deciphered instantly. Forgive me. In that very second, I understood a core element of our household had fractured and reformed irrevocably. As the cheers gradually faded, the event host, now beaming sincerely after his prior bewilderment, stepped forward to guide me from the platform. "Utterly remarkable, Miss Rucker," he murmured, showing a deference that verged on worship. Returning to my seat, the path cleared ahead of me. Attendees parted, not to dismiss me, but to observe my progress. A few brushed my shoulder lightly, whispering, "Well done." "That's pure enchantment," remarked a lady draped in a sparkling choker. "My thanks," replied a gentleman, his tone thick with feeling. I had shed the role of the overlooked bystander. I embodied the pianist now. I'd entered the evening as a forgotten orbit, departing as a rising luminary, leaving wonder in my trail. Approaching my relative's spot felt like stepping into a tempest's core. The atmosphere crackled with charged unease. Brianna settled swiftly and fixated on her wine, as though it held endless intrigue. Celeste lingered upright a beat more, her frame stiff like carved stone, before easing into her seat with measured intent. Neither spared me a glance. The quiet among us yawned like a chasm, brimming with harsh utterances exchanged and regrets forever unspoken. The disparity cut deep. I just basked in the affection and acclaim from a hall of unfamiliar faces, only to face the icy detachment from my own parent and sibling. Still, an inner shift had occurred in me. Their hush no longer wounded. It merely hummed in the background. Marcus dispelled the enchantment. He advanced with a resolve uncommon in domestic affairs. He seized an unoccupied seat, not from the edges, but from the middle, and positioned it beside his own. Then, meeting my eyes, he extended a signal that blended summons and welcome. "Ava, join us here." His words carried authority, crisp and unyielding. I complied, and he slid the chair forward with care. The gesture seemed ordinary, yet its meaning loomed vast. He was drawing me from obscurity into my deserved spot. Openly, he was reshaping my standing within the clan, bypassing any need for consent. It marked his initial display of authentic paternity in ages, serving as a steadying force amid the chaos. With me now at his side, my father lifted his glass just a touch. He regarded the associates at our table, who eyed me with fresh intrigue and esteem. Then, in a timbre laced with undeniable accomplishment, he declared, "Allow me to present my daughter Ava." He halted briefly, his gaze flicking to my mother's. "She's the true creative force in our home." No challenge colored his delivery, just a plain declaration, a verity long dismissed. To my mother, that must have landed like a sharp rebuke. He wasn't merely recognizing me. He was openly overturning the story she'd fostered. He was restoring equilibrium to our familial balance, now tipping toward me. I stole a final look at her. Her complexion, once ashen from surprise, now burned with helpless rage. But as our stares connected, I detected more than ire. I perceived closure, the dominance she'd wielded over me. The ability to diminish and undermine had vanished. Her validation ceased to be the elusive reward I craved. I came to understand that my value wasn't tied to her judgment, but rested firmly in my grasp through the melodies passed down from my grandfather. That heritage, which she'd attempted to entomb in a forgotten chamber, had recently illuminated Miami's premier dance hall with its glow. I averted my gaze from hers and faced my father instead, where he beamed at me with a profound blend of sorrow and affection. At that instant, I required no secluded nook to retreat to. I discovered my footing, not among the guests, but deep inside my core. The journey back in my father's Cadillac Escalade marked the most hushed yet resonant ride of my existence. Marcus handled the driving, his fingers clenched tightly around the wheel, yet he'd occasionally check on me via the rear view, his expression weaving pride with regret. I positioned myself directly behind him, sensing for the initial time that I truly belonged in that vehicle. Celeste occupied the front passenger seat, stiff like stone, gazing blankly at the blurring urban glow outside. Not a syllable escaped her lips. Her quietude rang like a battle shout, hinting at future retaliation. Brianna, seated next to me, fixated on her phone with obvious pretense. The atmosphere within the SUV hung heavy, laden with the burden of a familial empire that had shattered and reformed amid one melody. Silence enveloped us all, though the essence of it all had already unfolded. Come morning, an odd noise drifted up from below. Not the gentle murmurs of the household help, but the steady thud of bulky items being shifted with care. Descending the steps, I spotted my father in the entryway, overseeing a pair of relocation workers as they skillfully extracted my grandfather's vintage piano from its dusty confines. He pivoted upon noticing me, his stare holding a resolve uncommon beyond corporate meetings. "Morning, Ava," he greeted steadily yet assertively. "This piece warrants a more fitting location. We'll have it fully refurbished and adjusted, then install it right where it ought to stand." No need for him to specify the spot. His actions served as a bold affirmation, righting a wrong he'd tolerated far too long. At that precise moment, Celeste emerged atop the staircase, clad in her luxurious robe. Her features twisted into a visage of frosty rage at the sight. "Marcus, what on earth is this?" she snapped, her tones slicing like shattered crystal. My father held steady, meeting her stare squarely and replying with serene poise. "It signifies shifts ahead, Celeste. This home will celebrate true skill beyond mere awards." She descended, halting several paces from me, eyeing me like a pest that had marred her immaculate grounds. "You've destroyed it all," she whispered, each syllable dripping poison. I offered no retort, merely regarding her, and remarkably, Her wrath failed to pierce me. It deflected from some unseen barrier I hadn't realized existed. Her hold on me lay shattered for good. That afternoon, I encountered Brianna in the kitchen, where she prepared her brew with tense, measured motions. The quiet between us grew uneasy until she broke it, eyes averted. "I had no idea you possessed such talent on the keys," she uttered faintly. No friendliness colored her statement, yet disdain was absent too. It stood as a plain acknowledgement, a reluctant nod to an undeniable reality. "There's plenty about me you're unaware of," I answered gently. She inclined her head faintly, clutched her mug, and departed wordlessly. No mending occurred, nor would it, but acknowledgement dawned. Within her realm of measurable successes, my artistry had emerged as something she dared not undervalue. Our bond evolved into unfamiliar ground, a courteous separation, an icy armistice linking realms destined to remain apart. 2 weeks on, my father and I secured a modest flat for me in Coconut Grove. He pressed to cover the security fee and initial rents, not as dominance, but as a gesture of harmony, a concrete step to atone for prolonged oversight. "Space of your own is essential, Ava," he remarked while we finalized the documents. "Somewhere your compositions take priority." "Ah," Celeste protested vehemently, viewing it as an ultimate insult, as though I were deserting the clan. In reality, I was forsaking her interpretation of family to forge my path. On the relocation day, she stayed secluded in her quarters, skipping farewell. And curiously, her non-appearance brought no sting. It merely validated my choice. My fresh dwelling wasn't an opulent estate worth millions, yet to me, it evoked grandeur. Vast panes welcomed the sun's rays, carrying scents of new coating and fresh starts. When my grandfather's piano finally arrived, fully revived, tears welled up. The haulers centered it in the lounge beneath the primary sill. The polished mahogany now gleamed with a gentle glow. As my fingers brushed the white keys, the tones emerged full and flawless. No longer confined to a forgotten corner amid cobwebs, it pulsed as the core of my household, the foundation of my fresh beginning. Each morning, I settled in to perform, not chasing a tryout or seeking admiration, but purely for the joy it brought. Melody had shifted from an escape into solitude to a bridge connecting me to the world around me. 7 days into my new residence, the phone rang. It was the aide of the building magnate who'd risen first during the event. He explained that his employer, Mr. Sterling, had been deeply touched by my rendition and wished to extend an opportunity. Not a contract for albums or a global circuit, but a tangible, priceless gift. Through his charity, a complete grant awaited for advanced studies in piano at Juilliard in New York, with him personally backing my pursuit. The proposal left me speechless. The youthful pursuit my mom had dismissed as trivial had unlocked the path to my destiny. A path I'd carved alone during one quiet act of defiance. The ensuing period solidified the rhythm of my existence. I connected with my dad multiple times weekly. He inquired about my compositions, my visions for the city, the everyday details of my routine. He was discovering his child, and I was uncovering my parent. Exchanges with Brianna remained sparse, confined to brief notes on special occasions. We upheld a polite separation, akin to colleagues honoring boundaries. Celeste vanished from my life. Dad shared that she wouldn't even mention me. Forgiveness wasn't on my agenda anymore, nor was it required. Her quietness ceased to wound. It merely confirmed her preference for a facade over family. In turn, I'd selected authenticity above her validation. Today, positioned before my grandfather's instrument, as the Miami dusk filters into my personal space, I frequently recall that evening, not with resentment or sorrow, but with an odd wave of appreciation. That degradation ignited the transformation within me. It propelled me from the shadows they'd cast me into, guiding me to claim my radiance under the spotlight. My hands dance across the notes, filling the air with harmony that's free from torment, infused with serenity. It's the tale of a young woman who realized her value stemmed not from awards on display or external nods, but from the honesty echoing in her soul. And that honesty proved sufficient. The profound insight from that evening transcended notes or applause. It concerned the confines we permit others to impose. Worse still, those we choose to inhabit voluntarily. My mother had relegated me to a literal spot in the venue. Yet I dwelled in a psychological nook for ages, believing my significance too minor to emerge, to disrupt, to matter. The true adversary lay not in her directive, but in my readiness to comply. I uncovered that the toughest barrier to break is the one you embrace as familiar. Emerging from that nook meant more than approaching the platform. It signified approaching my essence, reasserting the territory that was inherently mine. What unfolded later revealed that kinship isn't solely the origin of birth, but the environment where growth truly unfolds. My father, upon awakening, started reconstructing a link long dilapidated. His backing affirmed that genuine affection doesn't require perfection. It honors the singular symphony within you. Conversely, my mother and sibling lingered across the divide my display had wrought. Their failure to embrace my success illuminated how certain individuals cherish you only while you diminish. Your brilliance risks revealing their insecurities. I grasped the harsh but freeing truth. Occasionally, to uncover your real kin, you must risk estranging the one assigned at birth. Each of us harbors an instrument tucked away in neglect. For you, it might not be keys and strings. Perhaps a manuscript yearning for ink, a venture hesitating to launch, a candid admission held back, or merely an essence you've muted to conform. It's that fervor labeled mere pastime, diversion, or folly. The rawest facet of your being, one society or even keen urges concealment for lacking utility or gain. It clashes with the ideal image. At the gala, I transcended mere performance on my grandfather's creation. I amplified every muted gift, every aspiration sidelined to obscurity. And my words to you: locate your instrument, clear the dust, and play your tune without seeking clearance. Transformation seldom storms in as anticipated. At times, it arrives subtly, in the quiet resolve of a bold choice. One unforeseen act of courage unfolded. There was no elaborate scheme for payback or a grand lesson to impart, just an ache so profound that turning it into something greater became the sole escape. The chance arose from a brief mention in a brochure, a gap fate had conveniently overlooked. What I've come to realize is that existence brims with such gaps, those surprise platforms that emerge unexpectedly. The real issue isn't if they'll show up, but if we'll muster the guts to step forward when they do. No need to overhaul your entire existence in an instant. All it takes is one instant, a lone second where you opt for your own expression instead of letting dread win. That instant holds the power to reshape it all. The real victory lay not in the thunderous applause from a room packed with unfamiliar faces. Rather, it was the inner hush that ensued. The peace of realizing that regardless of cheers or jeers, I'd stayed authentic to who I am. Approval from others is akin to candy, tempting and habit-forming, yet it ultimately hollows you out. Inner affirmation, on the other hand, serves as the sustenance that feeds your spirit. I no longer require my mother's gaze to acknowledge me, my siblings' insight to get me, or society's nod to validate me. I discovered my own endorsement in the resonance of that final tone, in the assurance that my grandpa would have beamed with pride, and in my dad's expression, which at last viewed me not as a letdown, but as an awakening. My value was never up for debate. The sole uncertainty was if I'd summon the strength to acknowledge it within myself. You might have sensed it too, that feeling of being relegated to the dimmest edge. perhaps within your household, your workplace, or even your inner self. You've been urged through words or quiet to avoid the spotlight, that your radiance is overwhelming, or that your tune clashes with the ensemble. If that's your reality, let this sink in. That edge isn't your fate. It's merely a launch pad. The shame weighing on you now could ignite the blaze that guides you ahead. My value never hinged on my mother's endorsement, nor does yours rely on anyone else's. Your value is innate, it's absolute, and it's poised for you to seize it on your own terms. If my tale has stirred something in you, if it echoes a struggle you're enduring, know this: you're far from solitary. A vast network of folks right here grasp the grind of striving to be visible and audible. I'd love to hear your narrative in the replies. Share what that instrument is you yearn to strike. And if you'd like more tales that affirm the importance of your voice, hit subscribe on this channel and enable alerts. United, we can demonstrate to everyone that the shadows often cradle the most radiant lights. Don't ever allow anyone to mute your melody.